Well, it's time now for today's perspective. And as the US has voted to go ahead with the impeachment of a former US president, we're going to take a look at the situation there when it comes to politics and process. For that, we're joined by lecturer in politics and international relations at the University College London, Julie Norman. Ms. Norman, thanks for your time. Firstly, we just saw 6 Republicans there joining Democrats to rule that a case of impeachment can indeed be tried against a former US president. Most Republicans, though, then still supporting Donald Trump. What's your reading of that ruling?
Well, Eve, this is about what we expected. There had been a sample vote of this type before the trial started 2 weeks ago, where 45 Republicans had voted against the constitutionality of the trial. So the fact that the numbers were pretty similar yesterday, with 44 voting as they did, was pretty much what we expected. It shows that a handful of senators are open to at least considering the process, considering what's shown at the trial, but that for the majority of Republican senators, they will most likely double down on this procedural argument to give them a cover, if you will, to be able to vote against conviction, but still to be able to say they weren't necessarily defending the actions of Trump on January 6th or previously.
However, given that the vast majority of Republicans are still backing Donald Trump, it is very unlikely that he will be convicted in this impeachment trial. So is there really any point to it?
Well, it's exactly right that in order for a conviction to take place, Democrats would need to get 17 senators on their side from the Republican side. And again, they right now only have 6 even agreeing to the process. So a conviction is very unlikely. For Democrats, though, they maintain that having this process is still important for holding Trump accountable, for establishing a public record of what happened on January 6th, trying to prevent actions like this from happening again, and really laying out the case to the American people to decide for themselves whether to support a candidate like Trump again in the future, even if he is not barred from running for office in the future.
How closely do you think the American public is following this trial? I mean, are they that interested?
People are following the trial, but I think it's important to note that the American public is very divided on it. Over 90% of Democrats support convicting the president, whereas it's estimated about 85% of Republicans from latest polls oppose his conviction. So the country is already pretty split along partisan lines of how they're viewing this trial. Both will view it through the lens of their preferred party. And so it's unlikely that despite Democrats' efforts, that they'll probably sway too many minds with what they're hoping to show over the course of the trial. But that is their aim. And again, some Americans will be watching more closely than others.
Now, the images that indeed we do expect to be reshown throughout this trial, those image of the rioters and the fact that there is now a QAnon supporter in the US Senate. How significant is that group, do you think, in the United States, and will it persist post-Trump?
Well, that's the big question moving forward, is how much of some of these more far-right movements will persist even when Trump is not in the Oval Office, isn't tweeting, et cetera. The fact is, many of these movements were in existence before Trump. Many will continue after him. He, of course, gave fuel and motivation to some of these movements. And it's a question now of what both leadership can do to try and quell some of those movements, to shift the Republican Party back towards a more traditional and acceptable point of view for many of its members, or how much there will be still that popular push to maintain some of these movements moving forward.
How much support do you think Donald Trump still has today? You know, if he wanted to run for office in 4 years' time, do you think that is looking likely?
Well, Eve, he will probably have that option. He can still run in 2024 unless barred from office in this trial, which seems unlikely. For Trump, it's in his best interest to kind of hold that out as a possibility. It gives him great leverage and political capital just to have that out there as an option. And we have seen him already starting to throw weight behind certain candidates for the 2022 midterms, suggest he'd be backing different candidates in different primaries. So even if he himself does not run, he will still try and flex that political muscle. And polls show that he still polls quite highly among Republicans. He still would be the front runner in polls that are given now for who people would want to see run in 2024. And right now, polls show that the party is quite split really quite evenly between those who see following a course that Trump set and trying to steer into a different course and bring the party in another direction. So it's really quite a moment of decision making for the Republican Party.
Back to the impeachment trial, we are expecting a quick trial. If that holds true, do you think it will have any significant impact on Joe Biden's presidency?
Well, Biden so far has been trying to stay above the fray of the impeachment trial, trying not to comment on it, really leaving it to Congress. It is known that he wants the trial to be pretty fast, which is a view pretty much shared by those across the aisle as well. Biden's very keen to get back to his agenda. He wants to push through his $1.9 trillion relief plan, and he wants to get moving on other legislation that's important for him and his administration. So for Biden, he's hoping this is over soon. He knows it has to happen. That's what his comment has been. He knows this trial has to take place, but he'll be very keen and eager to get back to business.
You mentioned there his stimulus plan. I mean, the Democrats have, albeit a very small majority in Congress, and yet already we're hearing of Biden's hopes to raise that minimum wage, that will have to possibly be shelved. How easy or hard will it be for Biden and the Democrats to get their policies passed?
Well, what we see right now is Biden and the Democrats do have a majority in the Senate, but it's very slim. The Senate's essentially split 50-50 with one tiebreaker vote. For most meaningful legislation, you would need 60 senators to sign on and get on board. What we see happening now is the Democrats using a procedural measure to be able to get through this bill in a way that does not require those 60 senators. It would require just the simple majority vote. That's not a process they'll be able to use often, however. It's one that's usually reserved by the majority party for their big, hard-hitting legislation that they want to get through no matter what. But for other legislation, it's going to be tough to get that bipartisan support, to get those 60 votes, and to get some of those bills passed that Democrats and Biden want to see.
Very finally, just looking at the politics of the US, I mean, it's that two-party system. Is that likely to change in the near to medium term?
Eve, I don't really think so. And of course, there's conversation about this now. And whenever one party is in crisis, this comes up. I do think that we'll see a lot of, splintering of different kinds of factions within the Republican Party in particular. But a party split would be unlikely. The United States system operates very firmly on a two-party system. It's very hard for a third party to get traction. So that's not something we expect to see, at least in the near future.
Okay, Julie Norman of University College London, thanks so much for joining us and giving us your perspective on everything happening in the United States. You're watching live from Paris. If you're just joining us, these are our top stories this hour. The Senate in the United States has voted to proceed with the first ever trial of a former US president, ruling that the end of a term does not mean an end to justice being sought. Donald Trump's team, meanwhile, says that he was exercising his First Amendment right to free speech when he addressed crowds ahead of the storming of the Capitol back on January the 6th. Meanwhile, after a day that saw shots fired and some demonstrators hospitalized with injuries, protesters in Myanmar are back on the street. They say that they will not be silenced. A determination that comes as the military in Myanmar raided the party headquarters of ousted leader Aung San Suu Kyi. And a radio station in Hungary has been silenced, seen as the last one independent of the government. The decision to take away its licence has been heavily criticised both by activists at home and indeed around the world.